This story's gonna prove to you that heroes need saving too. Today, we're diving into the life of a wild horse and a man who thought he'd never care again. In a scene of pounding rain and raw emotion, nature's gonna test them both and maybe show that the strongest bonds sometimes come out of nowhere. So grab a coffee, kick back, and let this tale pull you into a flooded land packed with drama and heart. On a late afternoon under a brooding sky, the wind carried a damp whiff of wet earth and fresh grass. A muscular black Mustang horse with deep brown eyes galloped free across the plains, its coat shining like polished stone against the gray horizon. It was the lone king of those lands, famous for its fierce independence. No one had ever roped that beast. Its hooves thumped the ground in a steady beat, almost like a drum calling out its freedom. But life's got a way of flipping the table when you least expect it. While it grazed near the river, the air shifted, got thick, with a far-off hum that spelled trouble. The rain started soft but soon turned into a deluge, and the river, once a lazy trickle, woke up with a roar. The horse snapped its head up, nostrils flaring as it sniffed the danger, but it was too late. A wall of water burst through, swallowing the bank and dragging everything along. It bolted, but the ground gave way, and the flood caught it off guard. The land turned into a drowned nightmare in minutes. Twisted branches and floating junk spun on the surface, like nature was scrubbing the world clean with fury. The horse let out a hoarse cry, a sound that bounced off the thunder as the water climbed to its chest, cold as knives biting into skin. It kicked hard, muscles quivering with strain, but the current wouldn't budge. Anyone who's seen an animal fight for its life knows. There's something in it that tugs at your gut. Caught in that natural chaos, the soaked horse started losing steam. Its black coat, once glossy, clung to its frame, and those wild, bright eyes held a mix of fear and stubbornness. It wasn't one to quit easy, but the flood felt like a foe bigger than its grit. Every stroke was a silent plea against fate. The water's roar nearly drowning its calls. Would anybody notice a king going down? Across the river, hidden by a curtain of rain, a pair of human eyes watched it all unfold. It wasn't just the storm's noise holding their focus. Something about that worn-out horse stirred an instinct in someone who'd seen life's roughest edges. The horse didn't know it yet, but the next page of this story wasn't up to it alone. The raging torrent bellowed like a starved beast, swallowing everything the horse knew. The black Mustang, now a drenched shadow in the flooded mess, battled with every ounce it had to not get swept away. The noise was deafening. Thunder cracked above while snapped limbs clattered together, like bones breaking in the distance. The water yanked at its legs, the chill slicing deep, but it kept its head above the surface. Anyone who swam against a gale knows how a second can stretch forever. For hours it held on, hooves scrabbling for grip on slick rocks the river tossed in its path. But nature doesn't forgive quick. A heavy log came barreling through the drifting wreckage and slammed its side with a dull thud, almost a goodbye crack. It staggered, muddy water splashing into its eyes, and for a moment everything blurred, like the dark sky might just gulp it whole. The exhausted horse let out a weak whinny, more a gasp than a yell, and its strength started slipping away. The current wouldn't let up, hauling it along like a busted toy. Another hit came, a jagged piece of old fence, its barbed wire scraping the shoulder and leaving a thread of blood to mix with the flow. The air stank of rust and sludge, thick and sour as it fought to steady itself. Seeing a creature like that, lost in the gut-wrenching pull of a moment, almost makes you feel its heartbeat in your own chest. It was all instinct now, but even instinct's got a breaking point. Nearly out cold, it got hurled hard by a bigger log, the blow spinning its body through the water. Its head dipped under for a beat, bubbles rising slow, and down there the quiet clashed with the madness up top. When it broke the surface again, its eyes were glassy, chest heaving in jerks. It felt like the universe was dropping a hint. Find solid ground or this river'd be its grave. On the far bank, under rain that fell like needles, a faceless figure watched. The man standing there didn't have a name for what he felt yet, But something in that horse hit him hard. It had no clue, of course, but the next move in this tale was already being scratched out by someone who knew what it was to claw for life. Under that heavy sky, a late-40s Caucasian man with short graying brown hair and blue-gray eyes leaned against his cabana's porch, the scent of damp wood and stale coffee drifting from the mug in his hands. The downpour drummed on the tin roof, a sound he'd trained himself to tune out after years dodging the world's racket. Once a soldier, once a firefighter, he was hell-bent on leaving the past behind. Sirens, screams, the load of carrying lives. All he wanted now was the quiet of dry land far off, but life's got a knack for pulling you back in. He spotted the horse by chance, through the rain-blurred window pane. There it was, a soaked black Mustang with deep brown eyes thrashing against the river's fury, its cries muffled by the howling wind. He rubbed his eyes like he could wipe the sight away and muttered, "Not my mess." He'd sworn off anything that smelled like trouble, but the way that animal kicked at the water stirred something he thought he'd buried deep. Who hasn't felt a tug you can't put words to? The emotional strain built as he stood there, fingers tightening on the mug till his knuckles whitened. The storm's roar seemed to mock the vow he'd made to himself. He knew the kind of fight that horse was putting up. He'd seen men give up with less, and in some corner of his head, a stubborn little voice whispered, "If you don't go, who will?" It was like a ghost from days when he still believed in saving folks. He dropped the mug with a thunk, dark liquid spilling like a bad omen. Grabbing his old coat, the rough fabric scraping his arms, he yanked the door open to a blast of cold wind laced with the flood's briny tang. The faceless watcher the horse never saw now had a purpose and a choice. He trudged down the hill, toward the river, boots sinking in the muck, knowing he was heading back into a fight he didn't want. But sometimes the battles pick you. Across that wild river, the worn-out horse kept struggling, blind to the fact that a reluctant hero was about to shift the whole game. He stopped at the edge, heart pounding with the thunder, and stared into the mess. The next step wasn't just crossing water, it was crossing himself. He stepped into the icy water, the cold climbing his legs like needles pricking skin. The river growled around him, tugging at his mud-caked boots as he pushed forward, water hitting his chest fast. Wind flung gritty spray into his face, the bitter taste of the flood sticking to his lips. Out there, the black Mustang was a soaked blur, its hooves slapping weakly at the swirling junk. He clenched his jaw. This wasn't going to be a walk in the park, but he never figured it would be. The emotional weight hung heavier than the drenched coat on his shoulders. Every step was a trial, the river shoving him back like it was saying, "Turn around while you can." A gnarled branch whipped by and sliced his arm, leaving a shallow cut that stung with the water's salt. He cursed under his breath, the sound lost in the storm's din, but kept going. Anyone who's faced the worst knows, stopping sometimes tougher than pressing on. Then came the big moment. The horse, drained and near breaking, twisted in a panic and landed a hard kick. The hoof smashed his ribs, pain ripping through, like a snapped wire, stealing his breath. He dropped to his knees in the water, the world spinning under that dark sky, and for a split second thought about giving up. But the horse whinnied, a rough, frantic sound, and he felt a bond spark right there in the mess. Did that animal know he was trying to help? Chest burning, arms shaking, he got up, the kind of guy who'd survived too much to quit. The water mocked him, tossing more scraps in his way, fence bits, busted planks, even an old bucket spinning. Pest. He grabbed a submerged rock to brace himself, moss slick under his fingers, and eyed the horse. The next move was going to take more than muscle. It'd need a miracle on the fly. The horse was almost done, neck bowed and eyes half shut, but still kicking with a grit he admired. The late 40s man sucked in a breath, ignoring the stab in his ribs, and started piecing a plan together in his head. He wasn't letting that horse sink, not after coming this far. And the river? It had better buckle up for the next round. He stood there, water up to his chest, body shivering from cold and pain, but his eyes locked on the horse. The black Mustang barely moved now, its soaked coat plastered like spilled ink, breath coming in short, faint puffs. The river kept up, its assault, the crack of wood mixing with the water's low hum. He wiped his face, brushing off rain and sweat, and caught a glint among the junk, a rusty roll of barbed wire snagged on a crooked tree. Sometimes the universe deals you a wild card right when you're out of place. He slogged over to the tree, boots sinking into sticky mud that reeked of rot and dead leaves. Every move hurt, his ribs screaming with each breath. But he snatched the wire barehanded. The barbs bit into his palms, warm blood trickling against the water's chill. Though he didn't flinch, he'd felt worse. With a yank, he unrolled it, the metal groaning like a complaint, and started rigging a makeshift harness. Who'd have thought a piece of scrap could turn into a lifeline? He waded back to the horse, the emotional pull hitting harder than the ache in his bones. He slid, the wire under its neck, careful not to nick the animal that was already on the edge. The exhausted horse lifted its head, dark brown eyes meeting his, and for a second it was like they were talking without sound. He tied the other end to a tree root, the knot tight as a vow. It was do or die. He'd haul that horse out or they'd both go under. With the harness set, he started dragging the nearly lifeless horse through the wild water. His arms burned, the wire cutting deeper into his hands, and the river hammered him like unseen fists. The water's roar swallowed his grunts, but he pushed on, step by step, body leaning into the load. The horse pitched in what it could, hooves, kicking faintly, and with every inch gained, he felt that bond tighten. Did it know it was being pulled to safety? They were almost there, the shape of a half-drowned Carvalho poking through the rain's haze. But the river wasn't giving up easy. A big wave slammed sideways, nearly tearing the wire loose, and he slipped, knee cracking against a hidden rock. He held on, teeth grinding, and glanced at the horse. The next heartbeat would tell if all. That fight was worth it. He yanked the wire one last time, hands bleeding and lungs raw, until they reached the Carvalho. The tree, half underwater, leaned over the river like an old man worn out, its thick roots clutching the bank like stubborn fingers. Water lapped at the lower trunk with a muffled growl, while the scent of wet bark and moss hung in the damp air. They were out of the river's grip for now, and he slumped against the tree, relief tangled with the ache in his ribs. Anyone who's dodged death knows how the quiet after a storm hits loud. The horse was right there beside him, barely standing, chest rising and falling in rough gasps. Its black coat, soaked and caked with mud, dripped onto the ground, and those once wild eyes just looked tired, but alive. He reached out slow, brushing its warm, wet muzzle with shaky fingers, and felt the heat against his cuts. It didn't pull back. Instead, it dipped its head, like it was saying, "All right, I trust you." Sometimes a little move like that says more than a whole speech. The dark sky kept pouring, but under those twisted branches, time seemed to freeze for a breath. He could hear his own heart thumping, wild and uneven, blending with the drip of rain on leaves overhead. He shut his eyes, head resting on the rough bark, and let the weight of what he'd done sink in. Saving that horse wasn't just about it. It was about him, about remembering he could still give a damn. So what came next? But the river wasn't done playing. A stronger wave smacked the tree's base, splashing cold water over them, and the Carvalho creaked low. His eyes snapped open, body tensing, and he saw the horse perk its ears, twitching. They were safe, sure, but hanging by a thread. Dry land was still a far-off dream. The next push was going to ask for more than a quick breather. Lying there, man. And horse, the bond between them grew sharper. He let out a low laugh, rough and half-hearted, thinking how a stubborn critter had turned into a mirror he didn't want to face. The break was nice, but the river was waiting, and he knew the fight wasn't over yet. The sudden wave hit like a fist, ripping the horse's legs out and stretching the wire with a sharp twang. He felt the jolt in his hands, the metal digging in, and saw the black Mustang get dragged under, its soaked coat vanishing into the murky dark. The river's roar drowned the faint whinny it let out before sinking. The scent of wet earth so near the bank felt like a taunt. Land was right there, but the untamed water wasn't letting go easy. He dropped the wire and dove in without a second thought. The icy water wrapped him like a cruel grip, the cold scorching his skin, and snatching the air from his lungs. Swimming there was like wrestling a giant's hand. The river shoved back, and spinning debris grazed him, a plank smacking his shoulder with a sharp crack. He forced his eyes open, vision blurred by mud and bubbles, until he spotted a black shape sinking slow. Anyone who's lost something dear knows. Panic hands you a strength you didn't know you had. He stretched an arm, fingers brushing its tail, but the current threw him aside, body tumbling till it hit a submerged rock. The pain in his ribs flared again, but he kicked hard, muscles screaming as he reached the horse. He grabbed its neck, the slick coat under his hands, and hauled, upward with a silent yell nobody heard. It was heavy, almost gone, but still kicking faint, like it knew it wasn't alone. Can an animal fight for the one fighting for it? The surface felt miles off, their weight dragging down as his air ran out. He swam against the river, arms burning and sight fading at the edges, until the horse's head broke through with a hoarse gasp. He followed, gulping air and mud, face pressed to it as they got flung onto a scrap of shore. The ground under his knees was hard and cold, but sweeter than anything. He collapsed beside it, heaving, the horse right there with him. The stormy sky still spat rain, but on that bank the sound of the wild water felt farther off. He looked at the horse, its chest jerking with breaths, and let out a low, tired laugh. They'd beat it, together. The river could howl all it wanted, but it didn't take either of them. What came after a wind clawed out like that? He lay on the bank, body sprawled on solid ground like a soaked rag, chest rising and falling in heavy pants. The earth beneath was a mix of mud and pebbles that scratched his skin, but the smell of wet grass and freedom was worth more than gold. The black Mustang was stretched out beside him, its drenched coat pooling dark water. The river's growl echoed in the distance, but now it was just noise. It had no hold on them anymore. Anyone who's been through hell like that knows. Making it out together builds a tie you can't put into words. He turned his head to the horse, eyes meeting its deep brown ones, and saw something new there. A deep calm. Almost a quiet thank you. He reached out slow, shaky fingers brushing its warm muzzle, and it huffed soft, the hot breath hitting his torn palm. Funny to think hours ago that critter was just a shape fighting in the water, and now it felt like part of him. He laughed, a rough, crooked sound, and muttered, "You gave me a hell of a run, huh?" The dark sky was starting to lighten at the edges, a thread of sun cutting the haze like the universe saying, "All right, you won." He sat up, body griping at every move, and looked back. The flooded land still churned, but on this patch of dirt nature's drama had lost. What started as a grudging rescue had turned into something else, a partnership carved in mud, blood, and their sheer bullheadedness. Sometimes you don't pick who rewrites your story. "Let's go home," he said, voice steady despite the exhaustion, and the horse raised its head, ears twitching like it got the message. It stood slow but sure and took a step after him, hooves thumping the ground like a full stop. They were beat up, bruised, but whole, and that was more than enough. That bond didn't need talk. It was etched in every mark the river left behind. As they walked, the wind carried a crisp pine scent from far off, and he felt a load lift off his shoulders. He hadn't just saved the horse, it had saved him too, dragging back a piece of himself he thought was long gone. They trudged on, the cabana in sight, side by side, ready for whatever came next. Sometimes the best teachers walk on four legs. This tale of a man and a horse shows life loves to throw tests at us, but it teaches too, about loyalty, pushing through, and that kind of friendship that sneaks up when you're not looking. They faced the river, the pain, and the fear, and came out stronger on the other side together. So what about you? Ever had an animal change your life? Drop it in the comments below.